Good afternoon, everyone. Just to let you know, we'll be going in about another 60 seconds time. We're just seeing a number of late arrivals to the number of registrations today, so just going to get another minute or so before we kick off. So just a quick message, just to let you know, we'll get going in about a minute or so's time. We've just seen quite a few people still yet to join, so we're just going to give them a chance to come on in.
That'll be the only time you hear us quiet, Gary.
Very true. Very true.
Very true. Okay.
Right, so let's get underway. So firstly, let me thank you for your time and your effort today. Mindful that we are, now in a kind of a working environment. Please, we'll thank the panelists in a short second. So just in terms of introduction, my name is Gary Pine. I'm the Chief Product and Marketing Officer for W2. This is the first in a series of gambling-related webinars, and we're looking to kind of put together a decent series over the next couple of weeks or so. So please watch this space for more. But without no further ado, I'm just going to hand over to our moderator, Peter Murray.
Great, thanks for that, Gary. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As we all sort of get used to working from home and the new environment they all have to work in, this is going to be the first of a series of webinars I hope you can join us for. But it's really around opening up sort of discussion and debate on the key subjects of the day. So today we're going to go straight to the point of what effect the lockdown's having, what its effect it had on operators, regulators, and every single stakeholder across it, because there will be winners and losers. But there's going to be opportunities, I think, for everybody. There's going to be opportunities to do things differently, opportunities to do things better, and certainly for raising the bar in all aspects across the sector. So we're going to keep this shortish. We're going to keep it to 45 minutes. There's questions which you'll see on, you'll get a chance on the chat room on the side. So as we're going along, absolutely feel free to put your questions in. We'll try and answer them as we're going along. We've got a couple of polls to put in there to see what your thoughts are generally around that. But we're going to try and keep it lighthearted, because let's face it, it's going to be a crowded space over the next few weeks with all the range of webinars. So it's going to be all about the content and trying to keep it interesting. But with me today, having said content is key, we've got a team of experts. We've got them across different areas of expertise, from the legal side to the operator side to the supplier side, across different jurisdictions. And we've got Gibraltar, Isle of Man, the UK, and where I'm in Spain here. And we've got different approaches to what the sector's doing. So just for 20 seconds each, if I could ask each of the panelists to just quickly introduce themselves and to keep things in order, I'll start with Michelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Last. I'm a partner in the employment team at Keystone Law, and obviously the phone's been ringing off the hook in the last couple of weeks with lots of queries about things like redundancy and furlough leave, which I'll talk about shortly.
Excellent, thank you. Richard?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Richard Williams. I'm a partner at Keystone Law in London. Like Michelle, I'm actually a gambling lawyer. I'm a Chambers ranked UK gambling lawyer, dealing with the remote and land-based gambling sectors and all the regulatory issues that surrounds that.
Great stuff. And we've got Richard on to make sure we don't say anything out of order. Paul, if you'd kindly tell us about yourself. Excellent. So is that Paul's the one who's going? Can everybody hear him? No.
No, I can't hear him, Peter.
No,
I think he's on.
Neil, while we try and work out where Paul's microphone is, Neil, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, my name's Neil Young. I'm the founder and a consultant for Hillcrest Pragmatic. So I'm a business consultant working in blockchain and gambling. My main focus is usually on operational compliance, but also operational efficiency and excellence.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Paul, we'll give you another try while we work out what's happening. Now, you might have to unplug and put it back on again, I think. What we'll do while Paul's working that out is we all have different places and landscapes and different jurisdictions that we're sort of working from. If I could ask each of the panelists to give the view of where they are. Hi, Paul, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfect. You're back on.
Welcome
We'll lead
back.
straight in. Give us a quick 20 seconds is who the silent Paul is.
Yes, so, my name is Paul Williams. I'm the Global Head of Compliance for PariPlay. No relation to Richard Williams, just want to point that one out. I've been in the kind of online gaming sector, primarily in the Isle of Man for the last 13 years.
And now based down in Jib. Excellent. So look, I think what we thought we'd do is just look at it from everybody's jurisdictions, just a brief couple of minutes on how it's impacting on gambling operators, the world where you're based. So Paul, we'll stick with you to start with. Do you want to tell us a bit about the immediate impact in Gibraltar?
I think in Gibraltar, I suppose from a regulatory perspective, from the Gibraltar Gambling Commission, at present, I think really the only thing they've really done is push out they've moved the license payments, so they're giving you they're kind of pushing the quarterly license payment to the end of the quarter, so it's deferred. The Chief Minister stated a couple of weeks ago that they were currently monitoring the sportsbook side of the sector, obviously with the big impact it's having. From, I suppose, in terms of the PariPlay and our colleagues, I think there's about 90 of us across 6 jurisdictions all working remotely. It seems to be going well so far. And then in relation to the customers, be it we're primarily casino, from our aggregation platform, we've probably busier than we've ever been. And I know we're going to touch on this afterwards. But basically, we've seen a big rise in the aggregation of our virtual sports product.
Absolutely, that's certainly a point we want to get to as to where the operators go in the short term. So, Neil, I'll come to you next. How's things going in the Isle of Man?
Yeah, so the Isle of Man, as a licensing jurisdiction, it's an external license. So a lot of operators here, they have a global focus, and obviously with their base of operations here, I think one of the big problems right now is that the island has had to go into lockdown. Only key workers coming in, going out. So we probably have people from international businesses who are either trapped here or unable to get in. And although remote working might be filling some of the gap for those businesses, we have the likes of Stars Groups here where there's a vast number of employees. I think in terms of customers as well, because the Isle of Man has such a global focus, the impact's going to be so wide ranging here for a number of different operators. We've got lotteries, we've got sportsbook, casinos, you name it. We have a different type of business here. So I think it's going to be quite a diverse range of impacts. But I think the lockdown aspect, teams can communicate with each other probably. The regulator is sending out regular updates to us, saying everything is to continue, but they're given leeway wherever they can and wherever's necessary. But I think one of the main impacts is going to be, getting the teams and the businesses over here to understand what's happening in their different markets, whether that be in Asia, South America, or elsewhere.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this impacts in different jurisdictions. Richard, from your perspective, give us the view on where we're sat at the moment.
Okay, so for the UK, obviously 2 different sides of the coin. You've got your sort of hybrid land-based and remote operators You've just got your land-based operators and you've got your remote operators. And I think it's interesting, first of all, to in line with every other sort of retail and leisure industry, obviously the operators with large numbers of betting shops, casinos, anything land-based is closed down. So they've been severely hit by the lockdown. To the benefit then of the operators who are purely remote, and I'm sure that their business models are working very effectively with remote working, which they've been used to for a significant period of time. And the thing I think we'll come on to is the hit to business by lack of betting opportunities through the lack of sporting events, which will have hit all operators directly. But I would imagine the businesses that are hit the most at the moment are obviously those who have rents to pay and would have had rates to pay, and staff to furlough that we'll come on to. So they'll be the worst hit at the moment. You've seen the results and the sort of share prices for the PLCs and how those have been affected by this, in line with pretty much every other industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle, I know you do across a number of different sectors. Do you want to give us a quick overview from a sort of employment law perspective and a legal side?
Yeah, so I guess what I'm seeing at the moment is employers are really thinking about kind of the short-term view and the long-term view. And the short-term view is obviously impacted by things like Richard's just discussed in terms of costs and whether there's any income coming into the business in the short term, and then whether it can really weather the storm in the longer term. So it's really about making short-term and longer-term cuts.
Okay, all right. Have you seen any just sort of any differences between different sectors at this point with regards to gambling or not? Pretty much everybody's in the same boat, I would have thought.
Yeah, not particularly. I guess it depends on, as I said, whether you've got income coming in or not at the moment. But like I said, if there's not much to bet on at the moment, obviously that's going to have an impact also.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's stick with you for the time being and look specifically at the issues around sort of employment and the employment law. And there's a couple of points I think I put up as a slide there that you wanted to go through. Do you want us to give you your steer across those, please?
Yeah, so as I said, it's really, I think for most employers, it's just taking the time at the moment to think, what do I need to do now to protect the business in the long term? And is anything I do now going to help me in the long term, or is this just a temporary measure to help us through the next sort of 3 to 6 months subsequently? So, and it really depends on the structure of the business and whether employees can effectively work from home. So I'm having a lot of clients at the moment who are able to work effectively remotely, as we do ourselves at Keystone. We work largely remotely. And where people are unable to do so, then there's still money coming in. So the options then are for employers about whether they want to make sort of smaller cuts to try and help just weather the storm in the longer term. So by way of smaller cuts, so just to give you some examples, sort of the classic thing that I'm talking to those employers about at the moment is about whether they can make any reductions in hours and salary. So if you've got an employee who's working from home and perhaps they can't do 100% of their work, maybe because they've got childcare obligations, so they're not sort of fully able to work at that time, or perhaps just that there's been a downturn in work, but you still need some people, but a skeleton staff. So in those sort of circumstances, you could consider a pay reduction. So a lot of employers I'm talking to at the moment are doing, say, a 20% reduction in pay. Now, because that's a change to terms and conditions, you do need to get employee consent to that. But what I'm seeing now, and what I saw sort of back in 2008 with the financial crisis then, is that actually employees are quite amenable to making changes to their contract if it means that their role is protected in the longer term. And also because people are generally pragmatic and understanding and recognise that it's much better to agree to a reduction in pay than to face redundancy in what could be the most difficult jobs market we've ever seen. So that's one option, is to reduce pay with consent. Now, just a word of warning, if you're looking at 20 or more people and having to reduce their pay, if those 20 or more people don't agree, the option for you then would be to have to dismiss them and start them on a new contract. Then you can get into collective consultation obligations there, which requires you to report to the government and also to go through process such as appointing employee representatives. So just a word of caution, if you're looking to do that, you're probably best to get specific advice on that. Another thing I'm talking to lots of employers about, whether they're doing furlough leave or pay reduction, is to require staff to take their salary, to take their holiday now. Because if your business is a bit quieter now, it makes sense to require staff to take their holiday. So that's holiday that they've accrued up to the present day, but also holiday that they're going to accrue over sort of any period of short, part-time working or furlough leave or whatever. And employers can do that. It's a myth. Often people say that employees get the entire right to decide when they take their holiday. That's not true. Employers do have a statutory right to require individuals to take leave at a specific time. Often employers do that, say, with the Christmas shutdown period. Obviously, we're looking at a much more drastic change at this point in time. But the key principle is what you have to do is to give the individual twice as much notice as the leave you want them to take. So if you want them to take, say, 1 week's holiday, then you have to give them at least 2 weeks notice. And the reason why a lot of employers are doing that, and I'm actually encouraging a lot of employers to do that, is so that when things do get back more to the new normal that we'll come to expect hopefully in June, is that you're not suddenly then having your clients sort of, and people gambling and things, and sort of things are ramping up back to normal, and then all of a sudden your staff say, actually, I haven't been able to go anywhere for the last 2 months, I'm going to go off to Barbados for 2 weeks. So when things sort of ramp up, you want them back, really, and firing on all cylinders. So I really strongly recommend that you do require staff to take holiday during this period. And what that means is that when they come back to work, they're effectively starting with a clean slate and accruing holiday for the rest of the year. They're probably not going to be too happy about it, but it ultimately, may protect jobs, and that's obviously a good thing in the sort of longer term. The other thing that I'm talking to a lot of companies about is what's called furlough leave, which is something we didn't really have until a couple of weeks ago. And it's basically a government bailout to employers to help them with salary costs, where people have literally down tools and they've got no work to do. So that's the key thing to remember, is that furlough leave is not appropriate where you still need people to do 10% of work, 20% work, or whatever. So if you have, say, a 20% reduction in workforce, what you need to do in that situation is identify maybe one person in a team that you would furlough, and the rest of them then go up to working 100%, if that makes sense. So furlough is something that you can dip in and out of, but each period of furlough leave has to be a minimum of 3 weeks. And then they can come back to work and then go off again for a minimum period of 3 weeks again. But again, it's not something you can impose on people. You have to ask people to consent to furlough leave. But in practice, what I'm seeing across the board is that people are consenting to furlough leave in the main. And certainly when I'm acting also for individuals, I'm recommending to them that actually accepting furlough leave, whilst not necessarily attractive in terms of its immediate pay reduction, the fact is you're still then going to have a job. You've still got some income coming in. The alternative is redundancy, as I said, in the worst sort of jobs market that we potentially have ever seen. So employees do have to consent to it, and you should get that consent in writing as evidence of that. And there are letters that we can give to people to help with that process. The issue we're having at the moment as well is that the government has devised this scheme, but literally just given us the bare bones, and we don't know how it's all going to work in practice. So the first step is really working out who you're going to furlough, for how long, who's impacted. But the second part is how you're going to get that money back. And that's the bit that we just don't know at the moment. The government has said that they're going to implement an online portal, which will be live in April. But as yet, we don't have any details of that.
I think this comes into the uncharted territory category. So it's So just before we dive into some of the more operators gambling stuff, one question just quickly come in, so we'll deal with it. So around furlough leave, so how does this affect sort of non-salary benefits, sort of holiday you mentioned, obviously maternity leave, stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, holiday is quite a straightforward one. As I said, when you're sending that letter out to people saying that you want to put them on furlough leave and getting their consent, my recommendation is that you include a provision in there saying you are required to take all of your leave during furlough. There is a bit of a legal debate about what someone should get paid during that period of holiday, because they're quite complicated rules around not just how much holiday you can take and when you can take it, but what you get paid when you take it. But that would be a whole session in itself. But from what I can say is that most employers I'm dealing with who've got salaried employees, where they're reducing their pay to 80%, up to the cap of £2,500, is they're saying your holiday is paid at that rate during the furlough leave. And then if employees want to bring a claim to try and sue for anything else, then that's up to them. But employers are taking that quite pragmatic view from what I'm seeing in practice. And I think practically that's the best option. If people are working different hours and their rate of pay varies, then the rules are much more complicated.
Okay.
If somebody is on anything, I can see there's a question about maternity leave. If someone's on maternity leave, they're not on furlough leave, so they would then be entitled to just their basic maternity benefits, whatever is provided under the company policy. So there's no kind of win-win situation there, unless, say, a woman decided she wanted to come back early from maternity leave and to go on to furlough leave if that's offered to her as an alternative. So you can't kind of have two different types of leave overlapping. You're either on furlough leave or you're on maternity leave, paternity leave, or whatever.
Excellent, good stuff. I think you're absolutely right. This could be a whole hour and a half in itself, I guess. Is there, so the last point before we're down, anything else you want to cover from that slide you've got up there? I think we've covered pretty much most of it. Anything we're missing?
Yeah. So I think that's the most of it. The other things that employers are looking at are layoffs, but that's only permitted where you've got contractual rights. So that tends to only happen to certain types of businesses. And obviously redundancies is the other option. And if you think that you're not going to be able to weather the storm, then perhaps, just going ahead and starting to make redundancies is the best way forward, really. So a lot of employers are doing that as well. And again, if you've got less than 20, a redundancy process can be done quite quickly within a couple of weeks. But if you're talking about 20 or more, then you're in collective consultation and the obligations are much more onerous.
Okay.
What would you say, Michelle? What would you say you're seeing the most of at the minute in terms of furlough or redundancy? Where are most companies going?
Yes, there's a real mix. A lot of people doing sort of mass furloughing, or they're looking at redundancies where they know maybe the business was already in difficulties and they're just going to bite the bullet and just accept it and make redundancies and shut the business. I think the other thing I'm seeing a lot of is about holiday pay, and as I said, just encouraging employers to be prudent about that. Yes.
Okay.
All right, look, well, we're more than happy to follow up on this sort of area because there's obviously going to be lots of questions. So if there's any you want to get through, we'll send a link to this afterwards and we can pick it up there. So thanks very much for that, Michelle. It was great. I want to delve into sort of the key issues from three main perspectives now. So the sort of operators, regulators, and potentially suppliers side. And I'll come to Paul first on this one, I think. What's the key issues when currently the operators are sat there, most of the customers are at home, sportsbook's gone. What are the key issues you think operators are facing at the moment?
I think obviously in terms of you look at sportsbook, a clear issue of no, obviously no sports. I think it's taken a big hit. I think if you look at the kind of the primary casino operators that don't have sportsbook, I've not seen a big drop or a big effect in terms of figures in the operators that we're engaged with. I've seen a big rise from an operator perspective in cross-selling, more bonuses around that are more focused on virtual sports, live casino, and then obviously recently I think that we've been working with two virtual sports vendors, both of them, one of which is offering a Grand National on Saturday. A virtual Grand National on ITV. Yeah. And I think the biggest challenge from the sports books is how do you get the general sports players back online, and how do you cross-sell them into casino or even to the virtual sports in order to make it as engaging as it was when they were betting on kind of sports books.
Well, sort of that cross-sell's always been of interest to me. I'll come to both you and Neil on this because Neil's obviously got that practical worked across a number of departments in an operator. So we've been there before where people have tried to cross-sell and would somebody from sportsbook go to casinos? Have we got any sort of tangible figures on whether that works or whether that's an option that will work longer term? Paul first and then Neil.
Sorry, PC, you cut out then.
All right, sorry. I was just wondering if we had any sort of tangible examples of how that's worked in the past, sort of people migrating from one sportsbook through to, say, a casino.
I think primarily in the past, it's obviously been done with. I've seen a few areas at the minute. If you bet so much in terms of sportsbook, that they'll give you some casino bonuses. It is a big kind of industry of cross-selling into that. There's many different ways of doing it, but I suppose bonusing is probably the main way in order to move people across.
Neil, from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think outside, the traditional data that we've had for many years still applies here. So the more verticals that a player plays across, the the higher the yield per player tends to be. But obviously, you know, given the circumstances we're under where everybody's staying at home right now, so where you used to run your traditional cross-sell and you'd be Saturday afternoon, you know, Chelsea are playing Man United, you don't want to disrupt that. You're not trying to cannibalize your sportsbook. You're trying to just get that extra advertising in there to give them the option of playing casino or whatever it might be. I think one of the challenges right now is that certainly anybody that might have had a slight issue that wasn't so apparent with sportsbook, say you were the £5 accumulator every Saturday type customer. So every Saturday you manage your gambling because you just do your £5 accumulator and you've been happy with that. Well, actually underlying, you might have actually been reliant on the entertainment value that gets. You have no football to watch. You have no gamble on at the same time. So with cross-sell, I think one of the things that we'll probably see is that a lot of customers are going to naturally just organically shift across to scratch cards, I would say, casino. But it's going to be quite troublesome for operators because when you're working in an operator, most customer service, fraud departments, payment teams, they'll be used to seeing this. You get the odd day where, you know, person X, they've gone a bit more than they would do. Oh, we'll monitor them at 6 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, they've gone a bit further. I think that's going to be one of the big issues. So before jumping into a massive cross-sell promotion or strategy, I think a lot of operators would be wise to consider the impact that's currently happened with the lack of sports. Also, for a long-term perspective, you don't want to cannibalize your sports book when it does come back as well.
Well, that's an interesting one. So if you're not going to cannibalize it, you want them to be bringing revenue in the meantime. But different, because Richard, what I'll do is on the slide now is we've had some examples of where we've gone with regards to advertising and potential other options. So the Belarusian Premier League, I know, is a particularly big interest of yours, Richard. So from a sort of, is there a legal perspective of where these guys go with regards to that and what they can and can't do?
In terms of what betting markets are left?
Well, no, I think we know what those are. It's just more it's the Belarusian and who's going to win MasterChef, I think.
Table tennis.
Yeah. So I think just generally around the cross-sell aspect of it, got any views on trying to drive somebody from sport to casino or the MasterChef?
Well, no, there's no legal restriction, although they're obviously going to have to be careful, as Neil says, and the Gambling Commission has highlighted this about your social responsibility, so that you are not, as an operator, preying on people who are sitting bored at home in the confines of their own house with nothing better to do than gamble away what may be a diminishing salary on gambling, which is something is not a sensible thing to be doing. So I think there's clearly going to have to be more focus on social responsibility and monitoring of players, given this sort of lack of sports activity to bet on. Then there will be people who either never played in casinos before who'll be drawn into it, or played in casinos before and now are actually encouraged by the addictive nature of it to spend certainly more than they can afford. So I think there's going to have to be an emphasis on that, and the Gambling Commission has certainly said to operators, look, you need to monitor this. You cannot allow this situation, because let's face it, a lot of companies are going to be clinging on for financial survival, and they are going to need the players. They're going to need the revenue, and it's whenever you get this balance between having to run a profitable and viable business and also something which is which is an addictive activity, i.e. gambling, and that is where you get the different forces within an organization. Now I've seen, as Neil's already said, I've seen within betting and gambling organizations this sort of cross-sell from sports betting to casino. Casino is certainly the more risky activity. Casino activities, you can play higher stakes, you can play at greater speed, you can lose your money a lot faster, and the evidence all points to that in general. And I think that's what operators need to be careful of, that whilst they are trying to increase their margins and their customer numbers and their revenue through casino, that they don't lose sight of social responsibility concerns.
No, I think that's absolutely the case. And I think there's a couple of interesting examples on there about balance and where you get it wrong. And everybody's trying to be maybe funny and inclusive, and they can sometimes put things up there that simply on reflection don't look good. But the one on the right, particular one around the Daily Mail one, well, we know their view on the sector, but theirs is happening to go at the algorithms that are in your iPhones rather than the advertising that's going out there. So I think we're going to get a little truck if we get this wrong. I think, and I think the next slide will show exactly where sort of the regulators are going. So we've got the MGA, we've got the Gambling Commission in the UK, we've got the BGC. Everybody's been really consistent with that messages, which is the stuff you've just gone through there, Richard, about you've got to start monitoring this, you've got to start making sure you're not overtly sending them messages while, as that tweet said, sat in their pajamas. So I think, are there other areas, Richard, sort of from a maybe cost reduction perspective, or anything they can do? They can obviously try and drive a positive traffic there. Is there anything else they could be looking at across the business to help maintain costs?
Well, it's very different for the land-based operators, of course. So the land-based operators will, I'm sure, already be looking at significant redundancies, furloughing, trying to reduce their overhead. So we've got things like business rates, holidays, which are now thankfully pulled in casinos and betting shops. We've got negotiations with landlords about rents and so on, rent reductions, which can reduce their overheads. For the online operators, I would imagine their overheads are pretty much fixed. They probably need as many employees now as they did, if they're purely remote, as they did 2 months ago. So probably they will not be taking a lot of steps in maybe doing more advertising, just purely because there's no sports betting to draw the customers in with. But I think it probably won't affect them. I mean, one of the things I've been looking at, because I also represent the licensed leisure trade, so bars, pubs, restaurants, is that one day all of this is going to be over. And looking at the example in Wuhan and in China, you're talking about probably a 2-month lockdown before things start very slowly to return to normality, whether that's from having to be in face masks, distancing of customers, temperature checks on doors of casinos or betting shops, cleaning of chips and so on in casinos. So, whilst everybody at the moment is looking at the immediate aftermath and cost reduction, maintaining the business, staying afloat, I do think we have to look forward as well to see what are the measures that will be required once the lockdown starts to be released.
Yeah, I certainly think what we do in the next, say, the 100 days we talked about as an industry will have a direct impact on our long-term sustainability. How we handle this and deal with our customers, engage with them, is going to be particularly important. Gary, if you're still on, we're going to run a poll just because we were talking about advertising. I don't know if you could run that poll now while I get Neil and Paul to look at the options to go if you're not already online. So we're taking those land-based or somebody who's not predominantly online. What's the practicalities? But realistically, what can these guys do to push everything into the virtual world? Neil, can I come to you first?
So I think, marketing is one of the most essential parts, especially for running an online casino. So if you're an online bookmaker, okay, you got the disruption to sportsbook. If you're an online casino, it's pretty much going to be business as usual. If anything, you're probably ramping up your operations right now, making sure that you have everything in check. So where we have these large operators, the likes of Flutter and Will Hill, they need to make sure that the casino is going for the business. Now, marketing is a huge portion of what you do to run those businesses. Everybody at the minute is on their mobile phone, aren't they? So, there was a thing came out from Netflix where they're reducing some of the bandwidth in Europe by 25% to help with the internet. But I bet a lot of people aren't bothering with the normal terrestrial TV. They're all on Netflix or they're on their phone. I think that article that you brought up earlier from the Daily Mail, that's a double-edged loss, essentially, because when you bombard people with your messaging, if it's not actually interesting, it goes into spam. And most technology these days lets you just mark that as permanent spam. So you actually lose your ability to reach out. The second part of that as well is you get the wrong type of activity generated on the platform. What you would want to be saying right now, for example, is, hey, we're still here. Hey, we're giving you a bonus because we appreciate you got more time in the house, so we're making it easier for you to enjoy your time because, we're providing entertainment. If you go too heavy on the marketing right now, I've got a feeling that you could break a large part of your customer base. And I think to Richard's point, which is extremely valid, is one day this will all be over and you could essentially destroy your customer base and your company's reputation if you go a little too heavy. So I think the regulator is actually providing some pretty good guidance right now. The regulators globally are providing good guidance to keep us on track. It's hard to resist within a commercial business not to hammer it, you know, so I think it's good that we have that balance there at the minute.
Regulator in good approach, Shocker. I like it. Paul, from your perspective and taking things online, if you're not already there, what's your thoughts?
I mean, look, there's, you know, I completely reiterate Neil's points and I agree with them. I think there's, from just quickly on the advertising part, you know, we discussed that, you know, there are some operators that have done some open some books from a fixed odds side around, you know, the amount of coronavirus cases in a certain jurisdiction. So, you know, there's certainly some bad taste there.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, anyone that's really not online, you know, the difference between land-based and online is such a different world, you know, even in terms of from AML, social responsibility. You know, we know that the online sector is inherently more difficult because it's non-face-to-face. You know, there are kind of quick to market methods in terms of taking a white label from certain platforms. But again, you know, it's I think if you're not already online now and you have a land base, then it's going to be very difficult to kind of jump onto that bandwagon.
Yeah, no, I think, and I think that's it. We've seen a lot of things coming out about trying to drive it online, but I think just the nature of where we are means it. I think it'll be almost impossible to do that.
Yes,
I would hope Toys R Us changed everybody's opinion on that. That famous "we'll never do online." That should have taught a lot of people a lot of lessons.
Yeah, well, I think if you'd seen the poll there, I think the attitude was within the industry, we've got this sort of advertising right, although there was still 12% saying I wouldn't want to justify it to the regulator. But just on it, sort of, we've covered the land-based and the operator side. Neil, you wanted to cover something from a customer service point of view and the personnel working in those departments. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think this kind of ties into part of when we were talking about employment earlier. And what generally tends to happen is, in a lot of the larger business, certainly, you're going to have a large amount of customer service agents, potentially payments and fraud analysts, and they might be on 0 hours contract. And, you know, they quite often, we see it for Cheltenham, we bring in massive capacity to deal with Cheltenham and the Grand National, and then they go off and shifts are cut. I think one of the things that operators really need to be careful of right now is that, given what we're saying about, you know, somebody that has been a great customer for maybe 5-6 years, they've been a fantastic customer, they really enjoy their gambling. This is a totally new dynamic. It's a totally new social dynamic. We're essentially in, you know, well, we are in lockdown, literally. So customer service, the front lines at the minute, are really going to protect a lot of those operator businesses, because they're going to be speaking to somebody, or they're going to be monitoring somebody's account, and they're going to see, oh, Jeff was on this morning. He's gone a little bit larger than he has in previous times. So I'd provide like a slight word of caution about reeling back on your customer service or anybody where you think, oh, they're not essential, they only deal with sportsbook. Well, it's those emotional skills that the customer service agents, fraud analysts and payments analysts pick up on, where they have had that really rough day where they're like, oh, this is 50-50. You know, do we think they're going beyond? That's probably one of the most essential things for all businesses right now, is striking that balance. You don't want to go disrupting the business, and you don't want to disrupt people while they're enjoying their time. But you certainly don't want to have people incurring a lot of problems, which is what the regulator is saying. So yeah, just a word of caution that those customer service teams, those frontline services who might have been for consideration of furlough or taking out temporarily, to keep those.
Yeah, absolutely. Any frontline staff are going to be critical over the next couple of weeks, I think.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I was just going to say, because Neil and I have spoken before around kind of customer service and access to the facilities. You know, at this present time, you know, it wouldn't ordinarily, generally, kind of senior management above have laptops that they take home, and, you know, information security is prevalent in that area. And I think, Neil, around that, we've spoken before in, you know, what can we do in respect of, you know, customer support when you have many employees, is it feasible to give all of them a laptop?
Yeah, and quite often there's one customer service agent who stands out above all others in the department, but that person could literally handle multiple really difficult cases and really save a lot of business. They say for every one person that you upset on a customer service call, it's going to upset 10 of their friends. But the cost to onboard somebody, cost per acquisition is just crazy right now. So yeah, when you're selecting your people that you want to furlough or people that you might be taking out, I think it'll be really key for right to the top to CEOs and executives to understand now, maybe spend some time on the customer service floor to understand, wow, these people really, really are the heart and soul of the business right now.
I guess the customer service guys are the unsung heroes going forward. I guess there's a question there about how we're being regulated at this point. And Neil, I'm not coming to you because it will be a regulator loving. But we'll go to Richard first around that. Did you think from a regulatory perspective, everybody working from home, everything else, the regulators can cope at this point? I think we're going to handle it well.
It's hard to say. I mean, we got a very early indication from the Gambling Commission that they would be working remotely, and they can, for all intents and purposes, they can carry out a lot of their activities they need to carry out on a remote basis. I suppose it's going to be as difficult for the regulator as it is for operators and anybody else to switch immediately to that sort of remote working. There's changes you have to make immediately to your normal processes. But sort of my understanding of working life, whether it's myself or any regulator, I guess, is that things tend to be bedding down now, that people are more settled, that after that period of sort of shock a week or so ago when everyone thought nothing's going to happen and then immediately it did, people seem to be starting to get back into a routine of working, but working in a different way. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether we ever go back to that old system of all having to traipse into cities to work in the future. I mean, once employers realize that actually employees can be trusted to work from home and do the job properly and work the hours and sometimes well beyond the hours, then I hope myself, having been in that situation, driving into a city for 15 years to work, that there'll be more and more of this in the future.
Yeah, I think that's pretty certain once we review this in sort of 6 months, a year. Paul, from your perspective, you deal across multi jurisdictions. Have you had any sort of interaction at this point with the regulators, or are they still?
Yeah, I mean, there's always constant interaction. I think if you look at, I primarily deal with Isle of Man, Gibraltar, UK, and Malta.
Yeah.
And I think the only one that I would say is the Isle of Man has, from an audit perspective, regulatory audits. The Isle of Man is very much a kind of desk-based review from their own kind of commission office, and then they would go down to your actual office and do a face-to-face. But in either way, in the last even kind of 5-6 years, the UK, Malta, Gibraltar, most of the time it's all very much kind of over Skype. It's done online. The regulators will undertake a desk-based review through looking at the website. So I don't think there'll be a big impact in that regard, particularly from a UK perspective. Maybe in the Isle of Man they would change it to online, but I think it's quite normal to do a kind of a Skype audit anyway.
Yeah. And I guess there's an impact on purely the number of license holders. The UK will have been a much bigger regulator, I guess. I guess there's another poll running there on what's the most casual bettors going to do, and I think still think MasterChef's going to get a bigger portion of that, but that's my view on it. From a supplier perspective, Neil, I'll come to you first. If regulators and operators are having to operate differently, what do you think the key areas around what a supplier would have to do with the day-to-day dealings going forward over the next couple of months?
Well, I think, I've received a number of emails from all the various regulators recently, and they're putting a lot out to say, look, it's business as usual. But I think a lot of businesses, especially like suppliers and operators, they're going to have to try and sustain business as usual, but there are going to be complications. If you had an audit coming up, for example, it's one of your key times as an operator, you're doing all your preparation. That does get a little bit more difficult when you're having to do it remotely all the time. I would say probably, and a lot of people, I've been working remotely for a couple of years now. So for me, it's not that big of an impact. For a lot of people, they have to go through the whole transition of kids disrupting, life gets in the way. I think it's just trying to keep it business as usual, writing down tasks. And I think they just need to make sure that the daily tasks continue to be the daily tasks to some extent. I think the biggest risk would be dropping the ball slightly right now as this adjustment takes place. I don't know how lenient the regulators will be.
I think so. Obviously, I look at it from a sort of supplier's perspective, and I think things we've seen and initiatives coming out across the board generally are around being a bit more flexible and trying to support. Because Richard's point earlier on, we're all going to be somewhere different in 3 months' time, and I think that sort of flexibility, whether it be commercial or support, for anybody supplying in the sector is going to be key. You want to be seen as being helping out when the times are struggling. So, sports books drop off the face of the earth. Commercial models are going to be tested, I think, during this time. So I think there will be an interesting as a couple of months' time as to where suppliers and what they've done during this period, and if they've been seen to be offering support, and I think they're going to be looked on favourably. Look, I think we try and keep this to 45 minutes. We're already over. But sort of summing sort of issues up. Richard, from a legal perspective, is there any other points you want to cover? Because I know there was some, you talked about how best to protect your business earlier on. Is there anything else you want to do before we finish up?
Yeah, well, just really taking a leaf out of the book of the licensed trade, really, with the closures that they've had, it'll be less impactful for remote businesses, but there will be people as a result of this who will be considering some form of insolvency measures because they simply can't survive through the onslaught of this. As I say, whether it's due to overheads or whether it's due to lack of business, and they'll be thinking, where do they go, particularly if they're just reliant on sports betting. So it's important to think about that. The government's actually taken quite a lot of different measures, as I'm sure you've heard about, including emergency loans for businesses, deferring VAT, tax payments, rates holidays for land-based businesses that would pay business rates otherwise. I think one of the interesting things as well that's been pointed out is that the government has also removed for a period of 3 months the wrongful trading legislation in relation to the Insolvency Act 1986. So this means that where previously directors would have been personally liable for debts whilst they were operating a business that was insolvent, those rules are no longer going to apply just for this 3-month period. And the reason for this is it's designed to avoid premature insolvency proceedings during this period until we can try and get back into business. And there are other measures which allow for deferral of that. So basically it's a similar support for businesses. I'm sure you've seen the measures that are available to businesses anyway to allow them to effectively suspend activities for 3 months and hopefully start off where we left off. Now, I don't think it's going to be as simple as that. For some businesses, the return to work and the return to normality will actually, it may never happen, but as we move towards that period of normality, it's going to be a slow process. So I don't think we can all assume that 2 months down the line and everything will go back to as it was beforehand. I think in a way the world has changed. Who knows whether there will be a return of the virus, whether the infection rates will start to ramp up and we have to go back into lockdown again. So I think to some extent there will always be this sort of business nervousness going forward about what if and what could happen, because the worst has happened really.
I'll come to the other guys in a second, but there's a question come in that sits directly, I guess, in your area, Richard, which is somebody's interested in your views on personal license holders. So the GC are indicating that if furloughed workers do not undertake maintenance, they will lose their license. Seems unfair.
If furloughed workers do not undertake maintenance, well, I mean, Michelle, I think the position is that if you are furloughed, that you can't do any work whatsoever. That's the rules. And I think HMRC have said it would be fraudulent if an employer would be requiring a furloughed worker to actually undertake some work while still taking payment from the government. So I think that would place PML holders in a very difficult position. So yes, I agree. I hadn't really thought about the implications of that. But if you are nominated in a key position as a PML and your employer wants to furlough you, then in actual fact the operator no longer has a PML holder in that key position, so it's going to put them in real difficulty. I think that's something that licensed gambling businesses need to think very carefully about before they were to furlough somebody in one of those key positions.
Okay, I guess Michelle, you'd agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's sort of key. And as Neil was saying earlier, just working out who are your sort of business critical people, and it may not be necessarily all the people that you're thinking of. You've got to take a really holistic view of the workforce.
Yeah. Okay, a couple of questions we'll try and finish off with. Before we get to Paul and Neil's final remarks. There's a question come in around the panel's views on the work being done by the industry seeking to achieve a single customer view. And potentially the legal impacts that may impact. It's slightly different from just the conversation we're having today. But Neil, so that the Gambling Commission in the UK had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, probably a month ago, where they got operators and suppliers in. What's your view on generally a single customer view? And I'll come back to Richard on the legal implications for that. So Neil and then Paul, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I mean, single customer view is it should be a great thing for everyone, but it's like not one size fits all is the main risk here. On legal risks, well, I'll leave that to the guys who are more experienced there. From a compliance and just general customer experience perspective, you know, computer says no is probably one of the biggest frustrations. As your business gets bigger, you start having computer says no type attitude because you're just bringing in general numbers and having templates. I think it's a positive thing for customers and businesses because it's an efficiency gain. But I think you're going to encounter issues such as when you're dealing with, say, responsible gambling, fraud, and AML. The three of those things are going to cross each other so harsh. Now you're adding into that this single customer view against sportsbook and casino. Well, somebody that maybe goes massive on a horse race today, drops a huge amount of money on a horse race, but they only do that once a year, is not the same as maybe somebody that's been escalating by 10% each day for 1 month. So I think it's a positive thing. I think it's very difficult. But yeah, I think it's going to take time.
Yeah. Paul, your views on it?
Yeah, I agree with Neil. I think Neil and I have both done kind of projects in the past in terms of specifically around the kind of AML risks here, and you know, the product verticals, you know, lottery compared to bingo, compared to sports betting, compared to casino. I think it's quite a difficult challenge, and each one of those verticals will give, you know, it's very difficult to kind of bring it into a single risk, to be honest. So, but it's, you know, is it possible? Yeah, probably, but is it, you know, it would be very difficult, I think, to argue that with the regulator.
Yeah, well, let's say we're not even get on to Germany, who's planned a couple of big tech projects around pulling everything together on how much you can bet, etc. But Richard, sort of final note on that particular question around the single customer view, any sort of legal perspective on it?
Well, yeah, a practical and a legal perspective, I suppose. So the idea behind the single customer view is that operators being encouraged to share information about individuals, so that if somebody has multiple gambling accounts, that the operator actually knows how much they are gambling with X, Y, and Z operators, and not just with themselves. So you can form a sort of more coherent picture of how much that person has to spend from your inquiries, but also how much they can afford to spend or lose gambling. But it does have fairly significant legal hurdles, as we've seen before with sharing of information, whether it's through GamStop or operators sharing personal information. It does have significant issues of data sharing and data protection. And essentially what you're going to have to say to the operators is you're going to have to share with your competitors commercially sensitive information about an individual. How much they're spending with William Hill is going to have to be shared with GVC or whoever. And I think that will be one of the main hurdles, not just a legal hurdle, but also a commercial hurdle. If you have a VIP player who is very valuable to a business, will it want to share that information with others?
Yeah. I think there's got to be...
Richard, No, I was just going to say it's obviously, as well as the current issue, even in the current UK license conditions, where you have a platform offering, some of them offering kind of 70, 80 plus white labels. We go back to the whole responsible gambling and the sharing of information, where ultimately the platform is engaged with X amount of third-party companies where they are providing a white label website. On one of those websites, like you said, Richard, the individual could be a VIP, and on the other, they could have self-excluded. I mean, under the current license conditions, you would say that because the company providing the platform is the licensed B2C operator and is responsible, then effectively, where a customer self-excludes from one site, they should be excluded from all the rest in terms of white labels under that one umbrella. But again, it comes with GDPR issues. It comes with all sorts of elements.
I might just add there, if I can, as well. We've seen with some technology that we use for fraud tracking before, when we turned that on, we got access to global data. So where we were looking at it for fraud in terms of gaming, we were also seeing, we can't see who put it in there, but we can see that the banking industry had marked this person for credit card fraud previously. Well, it actually ended up causing us quite a few issues. How are you going to trust that data that's coming through? I think this goes back to what you were saying, Richard, where there's commercially sensitive information going to be shared, but also how are we going to deal with the fact of saying, what's the trust level in these other people? So is GVC's fraud team going to trust, or responsible gambling team going to trust the Paddy Power responsible gambling team? I think that's going to be a really difficult part of that.
And if I could just flip that as well. So as a benefit to the operator, I mean, operators can go back to the regulator, obviously setting aside the money laundering regulations, but say, well, hang on a second, why is there any point, if we're looking at a single customer view, why is there any point us having to verify the identity of an individual if you've already done it? Or why should we check out the source of wealth of an individual because somebody else has already done it? So it's got to be done on a wider scale. So there's got to be some benefit to operators of sharing of that information. I would say it has to facilitate the processes they're required to go through as well.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a whole webinar you could do just on this one thing, which goes back to what we've seen with GamStop as well, which is who builds it and who sets the standards, what feature would that platform have? There's a whole heap around this, complications like you've just mentioned there, Richard.
Neil, that was seamless input into the next one we're going to do next week, I think. Nice. So last comments, because we're pretty much at time, and then I'll finish off. So Paul, any other thoughts or anything you'd like to add before we sign off for today?
No, I think I'm good. Everything we've reiterated today, and everyone's gone through the challenge at the minute around working from home. I'm sure the tech teams have had an absolute nightmare, and I think we're in the stage of now kind of settling down with this new kind of way of working, and really kind of it's everyone's still in limbo, I think, because no jurisdiction is really committing, the ones I'm in is committing to a date in which, and I don't think they can in terms of the lockdown finishing. But now it's kind of rebudgeting and trying to figure out really the next steps once we're all out of lockdown again.
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult, but there's going to be opportunity. But I think we have to. Everybody's going to have to sort of raise the game a little in every aspect of every department of every company we work for. So I think as we're due to finish on time, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. There will be a recording of this coming out shortly. We'll get some information over on the next one, which is due to go next week around social media. But I think that's probably it from us today. Thanks to everybody. Have a good week. And if there's any questions, please fire them across.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers, guys.